Texas A&M is expected to have a big year in 2025, but what's the one thing that could hold them back?
You are Locked On Aggies, your daily podcast on the Texas A&M Aggies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in. You are Locked On the Texas A&M Aggies. I am your host, Matt Galatzan, publisher of Texas A&M Aggies on SI. Thank you for making Locked On Aggies your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today, I'm joined, as always, throughout the week a couple times. We're kind of mix matching our schedule here a bit, but I'm joined by Zach Dimmitt. And Zach, we are going to talk about the biggest flaws for the Texas A&M Aggies this year, something that could hold them back from reaching their potential, reaching the next level. And then a little later in the show, we'll get into what our ceilings and our floors are, and a couple other news items here and there. But in terms of Texas A&M, there's a lot of hype. There's a lot of hype surrounding the experience returning on this team. There's a lot of hype surrounding a lot of the talent on this team, but there are some red flags, some flaws, just as there are with every other team. And it's our job now to figure those out.
Right. And I'm going to start on the defensive side of the ball because I think that there's a lot of talent there, particularly in the secondary. But I just think that if we're looking at last year and we had nothing to go off of except for last year, I think that the secondary has some things to prove this upcoming season. And you could argue, maybe the biggest flaw is at quarterback. If you're not as high on Marcel Reed, I think he's going to do well this year. And I think he has tons of weapons around him that it's almost impossible for him to not have a better year. But yeah, I just think the secondary is going to be the biggest flaw. And that's saying a lot about A&M's talent because the secondary is still very talented. But in my opinion, just by default, I think that they're the group that needs to improve the most. Last season, A&M allowed the fourth most passing yards in the SEC at 232.2 yards per game through the air. And just the talent that they had, last year, in my opinion, that doesn't cut it. You got Bryce Anderson, Willie the Third, Dalton Brooks, those kind of guys. Then you add in Julian Humphrey from Georgia. So it's clear they were trying to address that. I don't know if they addressed it as much as they did the receiving core, just because that was more of a necessity. They already had some good returners coming back. So they're, obviously hoping that they can improve upon last year. But yeah, that's just not the standard, in my opinion, if you're going to be contending for an SEC championship, which A&M still was. But if they want to, get over that hump and actually get to Atlanta, the pass defense needs to be a little bit better. So that's the one flaw for me that I see standing out. I do think the offense has a lot to prove, but like I just said, I think, there's too many weapons on that side. They added, tons of talent from the transfer portal, already bringing back an elite backfield that I think the offense will be just fine. That was kind of, a little bit of an inconsistent thing last year with A&M was the offense. They looked great at times and not so great other times. I think they'll be just fine on that end. But the pass defense, in my opinion, you got to lock that down. You got to make sure you improve in that area because fourth most passing yards in the SEC is just not going to be good enough. And I know A&M has higher standards than that heading into the season.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good shout. It's definitely a concern. They did add some talent in the transfer portal to try to, with Julian Humphrey, to try to, even that out there in the secondary. They're also getting back Tyreek Chappell and then at the nickel position, which should help. Right. But, they did have a lot of talent there last year and they struggled. So we're going to have to see how they progress in year two under Mike Elko and Jay Bateman on the defensive side. My biggest flaw is also on the defensive side as well. And I think I was going to say defensive tackle when we started the show, but I've kind of evolved my thinking as I was listening to you speak. And it's really just stopping the run, I think, is the big issue for me with Texas A&M heading into this year. Because, first of all, I mean, obviously you lose Shamar Turner. You lose a couple other guys off that defense, Nick Scorton and Shamar Stewart as well, who I get their edge rushers, but, they were part of stopping the run last year as well. There's just not a deep well of talent that is experienced at the defensive tackle position specifically that it will give me confidence in them being able to stop the run at a high rate. Last season, they ranked 9th in the SEC, giving up 135.15 yards per game. And against teams like Texas, down the stretch with the SEC championship on the line, they just could not stop Trey Wisner. There's a couple other games in there as well where they just could not stop the run. And it really bit them in the end. And now you kind of look at where they're sitting now, and the frontline starters are solid. You got Albert Regis returning. You got DJ Hicks returning. You feel pretty good about that from the defensive tackle standpoint. But behind that, there's not really a lot there in terms of experience. Dalen Evans and DJ Sanders, Chase Sims as freshmen, Jaden Scarlett, redshirt sophomore, Tyler Onyedem, graduate transfer from Iowa State. But that's only one other guy on that defensive tackle unit that really has experience in a on the interior in a power conference. So can the linebackers come and help them step up and help them plug those holes and do the run fits correctly and do all those things to kind of help that inexperienced defensive tackle unit? You would hope so. How much of the safety is going to play into that? And then on the other side of that, if you do use all of those assets to kind of beef up and stop the run, then how does that affect your pass defense, as you mentioned earlier? So they need to find a way to fill those holes without using too many other positional pieces in the linebacker core and the secondary if they can help it. And it's going to start at defensive tackle and on the defensive end and those kinds of things. But it's I think at this point we're kind of what's the term for it? I feel like we're kind of splitting hairs. I think we both feel that this defense is going to be super talented, and we're just trying to find if there is something that is going to hold this defense back, or this team back, it will be this, instead of, oh, this is a huge glaring red flag.
Right. Yeah, I think you made a good point there. I just think Mike Elko needs to just play constantly the Texas tape from this past season where Quintravion Wisner rushed for like 30 times, 186 yards, didn't find the end zone. But that's the whole reason Texas won that game. And that essentially is what prevented A&M from getting to Atlanta, because that game, I know it was only 17-7. It was, pretty close. Some may have felt that that 10-point margin was a little bit bigger than it looked. But A&M was in that game, and if they were just able to stop Texas down the stretch and not, prevent them from extending these long drives and burning out the clock, that game could have ended a lot differently. Obviously A&M had their chances on the goal line. The offense was a big question mark there. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, I just think he needs to play back that Texas tape and just show this is what we cannot do. This is what prevented us from potentially reaching our goals. And that should really and the fact that it came against your arch rivals after over a decade of not seeing each other, that should motivate the defense really, really strongly. And so yeah, like you said, if the run defense is strong, that just helps the secondary in a major way. So I'm with you there, and I just think that should be the biggest motivator for A&M heading into the season here in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Let's change gears a little bit. We're going to take our first break, hear from our sponsors. When we come back, Zach and I are going to talk about let's say the Aggies do fix these flaws. What is their ceiling? And if they can't fix these flaws, what's the floor for this football team? So we're going to talk about that next. Stick with us after this break. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the daily fantasy platform that lets you turn your football predictions into real rewards. Preseason is already heating up, and college football isn't far behind. Whether you've got your eye on big-name quarterbacks or breakout running backs, PrizePicks makes it easy to get in the game. I've used PrizePicks for a few seasons now, and I love how simple it is. I can get a lineup before my coffee even finishes brewing. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 off in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. PrizePicks, run your game. Today's episode is also brought to you by Drip Drop. If you're trying to stay on top of your routine, whether that's workouts, long days on campus, or staying focused through the back-to-back classes, hydration is where it all starts, and that's where Drip Drop comes in. I always keep a few packets in my in my backpack when I'm traveling to cover the Aggies, and it saved me more than once from that midday crash or those late nights at Kyle Field. Drip Drop is a doctor-developed and scientifically proven for fast hydration. It uses the perfect balance of sodium electrolytes and glucose to help your body absorb fluids quickly, delivering 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of the leading sports drink. Right now, Drip Drop is offering Locked On listeners 20% off your first order. Just head to dripdrop.com and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege. That's dripdrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONCollege for 20% off. Stock up now before the heat hits hard. All right, Zach, we are back from our long break, and we're going to talk about, what the ceiling for this football team might be, what the floor for this football team might be. And it goes back a little bit to our previous segment on it. If they are as complete a team as we think that they could be, what is that ceiling? If they have some flaws that kind of, rear their ugly head, what is the lowest, what is our floor for the 2025 Texas A&M Aggies? We're going to start with the floor. And I think that for me, as tough as this schedule has a potential of being, I really have a hard time seeing this team fall below 7-5. Your first 2 games out of the gate, I think, are wins with UTSA and Utah State. Let's say you lose to Notre Dame. Auburn, I think, is another easy win. Mississippi State is another easy win. And then that's where maybe it kind of starts to get tough. So you're sitting there at 4-1. You got the Florida Gators coming in. I think that could be a real tough game with DJ Lagway. Arkansas is a tough one, as we've discussed. A lot of one-score games in that series, regardless of how good those teams are, year in and year out. You got to head to Baton Rouge. I mean, there is a scenario in which Texas A&M is, 7-4 with losses to South Carolina, to LSU, to Florida, and to Notre Dame, maybe even Missouri, if you want to go real doomsday scenario here. But still, at that same time, I think that this is a bowl eligible team at worst, and 7-5, maybe 6-6 if you're really grasping at the worst case scenario. But I have a hard time seeing 6-6.
Yeah, and unless there's just some catastrophic injury issues, Le'Veon Moss goes down again, Marcel Reed goes down again, or not again, but Marcel Reed goes down. Anything like that happening, I could see that really derailing them. But if everyone's healthy, I agree with you. It's pretty impossible to see this team, not being at least bowl eligible, and they're not going to be below 500. That's just almost impossible with the kind of talent that's in College Station this season. So yeah, the floor for me is maybe 8 wins. But you do look at that October stretch, Florida at home, and then 3 straight road games. That's really just going to test this team's resiliency, especially when you head into Texas late in the last game of the season on the road. So I'm looking at that October stretch, and like we've talked about, as you've mentioned with Arkansas, I think that can be a really tough game for A&M. We'll see how things go at that point. That's in October, a long way to go. Until then, we don't know how this team is actually going to look. But I think that's going to be a really telling stretch about how the season's going to go. But there's just too much talent, and I think the expectations are too high heading into the season. I just don't think A&M is going to fall significantly short of that. Again, I think they're on the edge of contending last year for SEC title, and I think they're going to be able to do that again. Even if they're hitting a floor. So like you mentioned, UTSA, Utah State, Sanford, 3 automatic wins. Auburn is tough in my opinion. Maybe I think that they're a little bit tougher than some others might think, but I'll give A&M a win there as well. Mississippi State, those are some automatic wins right there. And then of course A&M is going to have a few big ranked wins in there. We'll see how that goes. There's some really tough games in the schedule. 3 incredibly tough road games: LSU, Texas, Notre Dame. So if they can go 2-1 in those games, they'll definitely be above any kind of floor that has 8 wins or 9 wins. But drop all 3 of those games, and you're definitely going to miss out on the CFP. But you're still maybe looking at potential, nice bowl game. But that's obviously not the expectation in College Station this upcoming season. So the floor is still pretty good compared to what A&M has seen in the past, especially during certain years in the Jimbo Fisher era. But yeah, I think even the floor is a lot higher than it has been in years past, and so I think there's a lot of things to be positive about heading into the season.
Yeah, this is certainly no Jimbo Fisher 5-7 concern here. I think that
Nope.
this is as good as the team as Texas A&M has probably had since the 2012 season with Johnny Manziel. So it's really hard to imagine anything lower than 8-4, 7-5, which has kind of been the stigma with Texas A&M over the last few years, is the 8-4 Aggies. So all signs point to them kind of improving from that mark. And if they can hit on every cylinder, if they can maximize their potential, if they can, do everything that we think that they're capable of doing, I don't know where the ceiling for this team is. I don't know that it's a national title contender. It's certainly a college football playoff contender. It's certainly a SEC championship contender in terms of reaching the game and competing for that. But I think that, if everything goes right for Texas A&M in 2025, the ceiling, I mean, it's got to be 11 wins, 10 wins, probably 10 wins if we're being realistic, because I don't know that there's going to be an undefeated team in the regular season, much less, I think there's going to be a lot of 1 or 2 loss teams at the top of the SEC. But I think that Texas A&M is right there with the rest of the contenders in the conference of, okay, we can get to 10 wins. We can get to 11 wins potentially if we get really lucky.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't see an undefeated season for anyone in college football, and we've talked about it, a lot on the show, that it's kind of nice heading into the season that Texas is number 1, but you can make an argument that there's not really a number 1 team, and so it's going to be hard to see a team going undefeated unless just one of these teams just has a dominant year, and no one sees it coming. But yeah, I think the ceiling is definitely obviously college football playoff, national championship contender. If you make it to the CFP, you're obviously in contention for a title, but doesn't mean you're actually a championship contender. So A&M will have to prove that. Even if they do make it to the CFP, a lot of people may doubt them, but they had to prove during the season that they really can contend for a title before we give them that kind of ceiling. But definitely, you never know. Semifinal appearance, quarterfinal appearance, definitely in the cards for A&M. I don't really see them getting a bye necessarily. But they could be maybe one of 4 SEC teams in the mix if they're able to get some big wins in conference and kind of push the other teams down. So I don't know. But in order to make it to the title game, in my opinion, you have to make it to the CFP first and show you can actually do that before going on some magical run to the title game. Obviously Ohio State last year was able to do that, even though they've had some slip-ups in years past. But it's going to take a pretty magical run for A&M to make it all the way to the title game in Miami. But even just getting to the semifinals, quarterfinals will be a great step in the right direction. Even though if A&M were to lose, fans would be disappointed that in that outcome that they came up short. But I think in hindsight, it'll be a lot of positive thoughts coming out of College Station. Seeing that Mike Elko has this team contending for a potential title. Okay, we made it to the quarterfinal, we made it to the semifinal. Okay, now in 2026. Now we're really contending for a national championship. So they had to take that next step first before we get too ahead of ourselves. But it's clear that the ceiling is an obvious CFP appearance, maybe even a bye as one of the top 4 teams. But you never know. We saw last year that the byes didn't exactly help any of those teams at all. I'm pretty sure all 4 of the byes lost, right? And so so if A&M could just get to the CFP, maybe host a home game, CFP home game in College Station, man, that would be awesome. But definitely, 11-2, maybe with 2 of those losses, maybe at Texas, at LSU, maybe you can throw Notre Dame in there, but that's probably the best case scenario, maybe 11-2, and definitely getting the CFP appearance.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think this team has a very high ceiling. I think they have a very high floor as well. So it should be one of the more interesting seasons that we've seen in College Station since we've started covering the team, which has been a few years now. So it'll be exciting to watch. We're 11 days away from the start of the college football season, so we'll get to see pretty early how talented this team really is on the field when they put everything together. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're just going to touch a brief bit of news on the SEC all preseason teams that were just released today. So stick with us after this break, and we'll be right back. Today's episode is also brought to you by OpenPhone. If you're running a business, every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you needed a service. If the first person didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. You moved on. That's why you need OpenPhone, so you never miss an opportunity to connect with your customers. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system designed to streamline and scale your customer communications. Don't juggle 2 phones just to keep your business and personal calls separate. OpenPhone can solve that instantly. See why over 60,000 business owners trust OpenPhone. They're offering Locked On listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockedoncollege. That's openphone.com/lockedoncollege. They'll even port over your existing numbers for free. OpenPhone. No missed calls, no missed customers. All right, Zachary, we are going to close out the show. We got about, let's say 4 minutes here before we get out of here. And, we've been talking about the talent on this football team so far on this podcast, and it looks like the SEC agrees with us because they released their list of the preseason all SEC teams on, as we record this on Tuesday morning or Tuesday afternoon, they released it. 6 Aggies made the cut, and we'll start on the defensive side of the ball. Will Lee, corner, he made all conference second team, and Torian York made all SEC third team preseason. The linebacker there, who for my money is the second best, maybe he's up there with the best linebackers in the SEC, alongside Anthony Hill and Whit Weeks and CJ Allen and a couple of those guys. He's right there. But good to see those two spearheading the defense for Texas A&M.
Yeah, there's no shortage of talent, that's for sure. And I think that Le'Veon Moss, another guy there, could have a big year. I know he was on the All SEC preseason team that the coaches released as well, so that's pretty notable as well there. But I know, this just stood out to me. Georgia has been getting tons of attention on special teams, so they better have the best special teams unit of all time next season with the amount of guys that they've been getting selected for those preseason teams. So, but yeah, I think preseason stuff is great for these guys. It shows that A&M is not going to be sliding under the rug with anyone. They're not. Everyone's going to be seeing A&M coming this year, and that's kind of a good thing. But in my opinion, as I've said on the show, it also can be to your benefit if you don't have as much attention on you. You don't have as much pressure. And so preseason stuff is fun and all that, but I think that it could actually benefit A&M if there's not as much attention on them heading into the season. But at the end of the day, some of the talent on this roster is undeniable, and that just goes to show where this program is headed. So,
yeah, absolutely. And the other 3 guys that made it kind of highlight what we think is the strength of this Texas A&M football team, which is the offensive line. Armaj Reed-Adams, Trey Zune, and Chase Bizantis all made second team all preseason conference for the Aggies. So they should have a pretty stalwart offensive line, as we have been kind of talking about all offseason. They returned the top 6 in terms of snap count from last season, all 5 starters, plus a swing tackle there and Reuben Fothery. So great unit there. And then one more brief note here before we get out of here. Marcel Reed finds his way again onto another preseason award watch list. He was named to the Johnny Unitas Golden Arm Award preseason watch list alongside a host of other quarterbacks. I'm not going to go through the entire list, but all the best ones are on there, and he's included on that list, and for good reason, because we think he's going to have a pretty damn good year. But that's going to do it for another episode of Locked On Aggies. Thank you for making Locked On Aggies your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Portal Show. Brian Smith has the latest rumors, portal entries, and signings. You can be the most informed fan on the rapid changes to the college football landscape. Find the portal on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel, give me a follow over on Texas A&M Aggies on SI and on X at Matt Galatzan. Follow Zach on X at Zach Dimmitt 7 with 2 M's and 2 T's. And we will see you next time.